Are we winning or losing the fight against GMOs? And what's the number one thing people can do to stop the spread of GMOs?
We're winning the fight against GMOs, and that's because the one thing people can do that's more important than anything else is to stop eating them. And the accumulation of the people who are now seeking non-GMO is so great that the food companies realize they must eliminate GMOs from their brands in order to compete with the competing brand that has the non-GMO label on the same shelf. In fact, surveys show that 46% of Americans say they're seeking non-GMO food. Now, I guess that the actual number of people that do what they say is less, but I think we have more people than we need, and the tipping point is underway. Now, we need to realize also that the biotech industry, who's famous for trying to cover up problems and disinform, they have a new campaign to disinform. And that campaign is built around gene editing. CRISPR-Cas9 is one example you may have heard of in the news. And they try to claim that this is not a GMO. In fact, it's so precise and so predictable, we should just call it breeding and ignore it. Please don't ignore it. Research has shown that the process of editing genes, as well as the tissue culture used right afterwards to create the GMO, and sometimes they transfer the gene-edited substance, all of that creates massive collateral damage in the DNA, and any one of those mutations may be serious for health. And yet there's many, many mutations that occur as a result of this process. And the biotech industry is ignoring those largely. In fact, they're using the same rhetoric that they used 25 years ago, saying, oh, genetic engineering is so precise and so predictable, we should just ignore it and not regulate it. Well, unfortunately, CRISPR-Cas9 and other gene editing techniques are so inexpensive that any facility with a laboratory can genetically engineer products almost at no cost. And yet there is a big advantage if you can put a patented GMO in the market and make money before the patent expires. And so what we have is a gold rush into the genome, a gene rush. And everything with DNA is targeted. So if we are not vigilant, then the biotech industry could literally replace nature, eliminate the products of the billions of years of evolution, and replace it with designer organisms released into the environment, which then self-propagate in the gene pool. So that means all future generations after this one may inherit the travesty of a technology that's most common result is unpredicted side effects. And these side effects are multiplied when you put them in the environment, because you have side effects within the organism, and then you have side effects in their interactions with the complex food and ecological web. So we're at a very important turning point, or not. Are we going to turn away from nature and eliminate what we have been given from previous generations and turn it over to a Monsanto/Bayer version of reality? Or are we going to protect the genetic integrity? And the number one thing people can do is to avoid GMOs and to share this information with others. It is interesting that it's kind of a responsibility for us now that this technology is available, but it's also an opportunity, because no other technology in history has been able to negatively affect all living beings and all future generations. And so we get the ability to protect all living beings and all future generations.
When you go in the grocery, you're seeing, as you said, more and more non-GMO products. People are getting more and more hip to this and starting to buy those products. Can they label something as non-GMO when the reality is they're just doing the same old thing anyway, and they're just marketing it that way?
There are many non-GMO labels on the market. The one that I look for is Non-GMO Project Verified. That's a third-party organization. They require, if there's any at-risk ingredients in the final product, that the inputs get tested, and tested by a credentialed laboratory. They have a document review. They have visits. So I recommend the Non-GMO Project Verification Program. There's also what we call self-certification, where a company may just slap a non-GMO on their box. And I remember Cheerios did that. in early 2014, and I called them up and said, "What's your criteria?" And they wouldn't tell me. So Trader Joe's said, "We don't allow the use of GMOs in our named brands that say Trader Joe's." And I'm seeing high fructose corn syrup, and I'm thinking, well, what do they do? And what's their testing procedure? They don't release that either. So we are frustrated by companies that don't give us the details. We consistently ask them to turn over the details. We're grateful that they're taking attempts to avoid GMOs, but we're not fully satisfied with their label.
Tell us about this $289 million verdict against Bayer. What does it mean, and does it affect the industry?
Monsanto was purchased by Bayer, the aspirin company, but they also have a crop division that sells GMOs and herbicides, etc. And when they were looking to purchase Monsanto, I released a document for their shareholders pointing out about 10 areas where there was high-risk exposure that they weren't taking into consideration. And one of those was the health dangers and the cancer determination. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, a branch of the World Health Organization, had determined that glyphosate, which is the chief poison in Roundup, was a class 2A carcinogen, a probable human carcinogen. And the strongest evidence was about non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Well, the lawyers got hold of it, and that was a good thing. And they represented a groundskeeper, Lee Johnson, from the Bay Area in California, who had been exposed to Roundup while he was a groundskeeper. He was, I think, delivering as much as, 150 gallons a day on the days that he was spraying. The wind would blow it into his face. One time the hose broke and he got drenched. Another time his backpack broke and he got drenched in the back. And he ended up calling the company hotline, a couple of times reaching out saying, "Is there any connection? Because I have rashes, now I have cancer, is there any connection?" And even after the International Agency for Research on Cancer determined that glyphosate was a probable human carcinogen, 2 weeks after that, he called and was never told about the link and continued to use Roundup. And his situation changed from a curable cancer to a supposedly incurable terminal cancer. And so they rushed his trial while he was still alive, and he is still alive at this point. And it was interesting. I interviewed the chief attorney, Brent Wisner, and on our site, responsibletechnology.org, I strongly recommend. It's fascinating, it's entertaining, some people call it life-changing, to watch these 6-part, or now probably more than that, interview with Brent Wisner. He's amazing. I was on the Doctor's TV show with him for a full episode arguing about the problems with the cancer-causing glyphosate and revealing the secret documents from Monsanto that he was able to force into public domain. There's a whole story about that. You got to catch that. And I was there during the closing arguments that were very dramatic and reported on it in live Facebook at the Institute for Responsible Technology Facebook page. And when the jury verdict was read, it was a shot heard round the world. They awarded in compensatory damages, which is the actual cost to Lee, of $38 million, and then, or 39, and then the punitive damages was $250 million. So the total is $289 million. Now the judge later reduced it to a total of about $78 million, but nonetheless, when the $289 million was announced, soon after the Bayer capitalization, the stock prices dropped by 20 to 30%. $20 billion drop on and because they have nearly 10,000 other plaintiffs waiting in the wings. Now, at one point, a judge said that they were going to limit the evidence that was available to the jury in future trials, and Bayer's stock price went up 7%. And then another judge just recently said, in at least the trials that he oversees, that he was going to allow more evidence than the other judge said. And I haven't seen the stock prices change, but It is very significant because it actually represents an incredible opportunity for the makers of Roundup and the liars about Roundup to pay out to those who've suffered from their lies. And there's a lot of very serious issues. I mean, Lee Johnson is supposed to die soon, and I've met him, and it's a very sad thing. And the victory in the courts is a magnificent thing because that can help prevent other sad situations. And between the announcement by the International Agency for Research on Cancer in 2015 and this announcement by the jury, it's a shot heard around the world, and people now realize that Roundup is linked to cancer, in spite of the fact that Monsanto's people at the EPA, and I'm using that very specifically, watch that interview to find out how they have a lapdog in the EPA that they were working with, and he was going back and forth with texting, and they were talking about him by email, and he was clearly a Monsanto man in charge of the EPA's determination of whether glyphosate was caused cancer, and of course he said it didn't, and he even helped stop another agency from doing research on the same thing, and said if I can stop it, I deserve a medal. So you can know where his thinking is. So they've created a controversy, and a recent study has shown that the EPA and the European regulators specifically cherry-picked the data by looking at almost entirely, for their decisions, unpublished industry research, whereas the International Agency for Research on Cancer, or IARC, looked at published studies. And the vast majority of the published studies showed toxicity to the DNA, and only one of the industry studies of about 99 showed that there was toxicity to the DNA. And so they came to different conclusions because it was designed to come to different conclusions. They cherry-picked the data specifically to ignore the evidence. And there's many other details in terms of how they ignored it, and we've caught them red-handed. So this is an important development. That the courts are now moving the needle on glyphosate, Roundup, and because most GMOs are Roundup ready, it's also moving the needle on GMOs as well.
If someone is against GMOs, are they better off voting Republican or Democrat?
They're better off voting with their dollar. It's interesting. The Democrats and the Republicans, both the presidents since Reagan, have been pro-GMO. The Obama administration was worse than the previous Bush administration on GMOs, and Trump is no better than Obama. There's been a lockdown in Washington, both at the executive level and the congressional level. And even the Supreme Court has Clarence Thomas, who was a former Monsanto attorney. So we are not set up to win in Washington right now. The USDA under Trump released a fake labeling bill, one that basically deceives every American and works on behalf of the biotech industry. I've written about it. We have a petition at responsibletechnology.org. Please go there and sign it. And the petitions usually don't have much impact, but this one is not only aimed at the White House and the USDA, but it's aimed at the food companies, because in the petition we give them information about how this labeling, this fake labeling deal, will actually hurt their interests. And I'm sure they never thought of it, so please go there and learn about the fake labeling bill under the Trump USDA. But I can't single out Trump or Obama or Bush or Clinton. They all have been pushing the GMO agenda. And I can give specific examples, but just assume that it's outside the apparatus of U.S. politics in the federal level where we're going to win. And we used to think that the state level would have a lot of power for us because we had state ballot initiatives for labeling. The representatives of Vermont passed a labeling bill, and of course the Congress rushed in and preempted state labeling bills and ballot initiatives, saying no state can require labeling of GMOs. It's going to be a national thing, and we give it to the USDA to determine it over 2 years, and that's what they did. They came up with a fake labeling bill. So what's great about the GMO campaigning, for me, is that you don't actually have to change government policy in order to win. The European Commission, for example, is pro-GMO. and so is their version of the FDA, the European Food Safety Authority. But they don't sell GMOs in the food supply except through animal feed, because the people learned about them because of an open media and a big scandal that happened in 1999 about food safety that no one in the US knows about. And because there was so much concern about GMOs among the population, the food companies, not the government, banned GMOs from their food supply. Unilever, April 27th, 1999. Nestle's, April 28th. Everyone else within a couple of weeks. 1999, in Europe, but not here. The same companies that banned it there continued to sell the unsuspecting Americans the GMOs that the Europeans had rejected.
There are stories out there that Monsanto does what it can to hush their opposition. Surely you've been under, I don't want to use the word attack, but can you tell us anything about your experiences in terms of, you having this voice against these folks, and what have you experienced from them?
Well, when Boy Scouts get merit badges for doing certain things, I got my merit badge when Monsanto started to attack me. It's like I was exposing how they were suppressing evidence, attacking and threatening scientists, getting people fired, covering up. And I was just sort of biding my time, waiting until, obviously it was on their radar. I had the world's best-selling book on GMOs, Seeds of Deception. I'd been traveling to 25 countries by this time. And then I came out with the book Genetic Roulette, which was a compilation of all the health dangers. And people were using that all over the world as kind of like the Bible, because it was all the different health dangers, I could gather from all the different scientists around the world. And then what they did is they paid some of their so-called scientists to come up with a hit website that supposedly showed that my evidence was wrong. But what it did is it showed how they distorted and denied. By even after 3 years that it was on the market, they published a rebuttal that misquoted or mischaracterized the book in order for them to make their arguments. So they came up with a fake website at great expense. They did probably hired private investigators to look at my past and tried to find skeletons. They found out that I meditate and that I dance. So they tried to use that against me. So at this point, they have a very specific structure, a line item in their budget called Let Nothing Go. And anytime someone posts something on Facebook, one of their thousands of trolls will comment and try and shame them and make it unpopular. When a scientist comes up with something, they'll gather the troops and try and suppress that. I think I'm targeted by that same budget line item, and I actually ignore it. I don't read the articles written by the people that get money from Monsanto, and they try to hide the fact that they're getting money, and we've been able to actually verify that they are being paid. They're paid agents. And so I don't bother reading them or replying to them. What I do is get my word out to millions and help move the markets by telling the truth. And if a dozen people think that I'm a bad person because I'm me calling for more science, if they want to call me anti-science, that's fine. So I want to bring this up, that a lot of people listening will want to share what they've heard about GMOs on their social media. And I think it's in Huffington Post, an article about the trolls, the people hired by Monsanto Bayer to shame you if you do such that. If you post something, you may get someone that looks like a real person, but they have a fake name and they have an argument which is designed to make you sound wrong. So this shaming technique works in human nature. It's been the basis of so many corporate and political and religious campaigns through history, because people shrink from that shaming. And now with social media, it's kind of a public shaming. So I'm going to ask people not to be susceptible. That when you get shamed, make it your merit badge. Aha! We found a troll. You can link to my troll article and say, aha, we found a troll. Go here, go here. If you run your own Facebook page, just kick them out. Just take them out. They don't deserve your time or attention or the attention of the people that read your posts. So I want to suggest that people just flip the whole energy around this public shaming. No constriction, no fear. Actually wear it as a merit badge and say, aha, I'm making enough, stirring enough of the pot so I'm getting the attention. Now, not everyone that posts negatively is a troll. There's the liars and the lied to. And sometimes the lied to will just pick up the same energy and say, yes, this is wrong, because that's what they've been told. But we have documented all of the myths and truths. There's even a book called Gmo Myths and Truths online, which I recommend, written by friends of mine. There is so much evidence now supporting our case and completely undermining their case that we actually have the truth on our side.